Now, we go to the next major biomolecule, which is the lipid. So, remember that we have the cell is composed of 4 major biomolecules. We have carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So, among those 4, only the lipid is not polymeric. Okay, so dili siya composed of monomers. Okay, so So lipids are hydrophobic, meaning water-hating or water-fearing. Water, phobic, fear. So water-fearing, non-polar molecules. So these are non-polar. They are soluble in non-polar solvent, so meaning they are not soluble in water. And they are insoluble in polar solvents, like water, because water is a polar solvent. They are isolated from other biological molecules by extracting them with non-polar solvents. So it's easy to extract lipids because they are non-polar. So you just need to extract them using non-polar solvents. Kay ang lipid mo mix siya sa non-polar solvent. So you can extract lipids in a sample. So there are different types of lipids that we will look at in this lecture. So we have fatty acids, waxes, triglycerides, phospholipids and glycolipids. We have steroids, eicosanoids, membranes, and these membranes are formed from phospholipids and glycolipids. So we will divide this into 2 video lectures, or 3 rather. So we will have a separate lecture for the glycolipids. Okay, so let's start with fatty acids. Okay, so fatty acids are like the building blocks. They're like the building blocks of lipids, because the different type of lipids, almost all those types of lipids contain fatty acids. So fatty acids class are organic acids that has an acid group and a methyl group at the other end. So they're basically carboxylic acid. So if you notice, they're basically carboxylic acid, diba? This is the functional group of the carboxylic acid, and it has, of course, it has a methyl end at the methyl group at the end, diba? It is basically a carboxylic acid, but these are long chains of carboxylic acids. So fatty acids differ in length and in their saturation. So the length affects the absorption in the body. So, kung unsa sila kakusog i-absorb sa body, and the saturation also affects the chemical structure, and so the affecting the chemical structure will affect the cooking, storage, properties, and health. Okay, so you will see that you will see later why this is so. But for now, you should know nga ang fatty acids, they vary in length. So kung unsa kataas ang carbon chain, o they vary in saturation. Saturation meaning kung unsa kadaghan ang double bonds, or if wala ba siya double bonds. Okay? So we have, first, let's have this saturated fatty acid. So stearic acid is a saturated fatty acid. So this is an example of a fatty acid. It has a carboxyl acid at the carboxylic group at the end, and it has a methyl group at the end. So these are examples of fatty acids. Okay? So you can also write this in this form, kining structure. So every corner is kanang kining every anana. It's 1 carbon for every corner. Okay, so that's how you draw fatty acid and then so this is the length of carbon chain. So stearic acid contains 18 carbons. Okay, so it contains 18 carbons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, so it contains 18 carbons, and it is saturated because it does not contain a double bond. Okay, so walay carbon-carbon double bond. There's nothing like that, diba? all carbon-carbon bonds are single bonds. So that's why it's called saturated. Okay? So meaning fatty acids could be unsaturated, they could be monounsaturated, they could be polyunsaturated, or they could be polyunsaturated. Okay? So these are examples. So for example, this one, sorry class, this one is saturated. Okay, so if you notice, walay carbon-carbon double bond. So stearic acid is a saturated fatty acid. Okay, for this one, this is monounsaturated. So this should not contain an. Okay, so oleic acid is a monounsaturated, meaning it has one carbon-carbon double bond, mono. So ang unsaturated should contain double bond. Okay? We have polyunsaturated, meaning it has more than one double bond. Okay? So like linoleic and linolenic. Okay? So for fatty acids class, you have to know the number of carbons and the saturation of some of these fatty acids. Okay? Like these examples, these are common fatty acids. So you have to know kung pila na ka carbon kana nga fatty acid and if that contains double bond. Okay? Because these are common fatty acids man. You don't need to memorize everything, but you at least have to recognize these common fatty acids. Okay? So again, unsaturated fatty acid like the stearic contains no carbon-carbon double bonds. Okay? So if you have a saturated fat, that means if you have a saturated fat, it contains all of the triglycerides, all of the fatty acids are saturated. So example ana class are butter, lard. Okay? So ang kining saturated fatty acids, they appear solid at room temperature. Compare that with unsaturated fatty acids. This contains one or more carbon-carbon double bond, diba? So example ana, we have olive oil, we have corn, okay? Sunflower oil, and these appear liquid at room temperature. So ang saturated, they appear solid, but ang unsaturated, they appear liquid. So why is that so? So ano ni class? If you notice, ang saturated kay, if this is the COOH, let's just have, if this is the COOH, this is the saturated. So puros ra siya single bond. Whereas kung nakay unsaturated class, it could form nay double bond dira, so nay hindrance diri, so mo form na siya og kink if naay double bond. So dili siya maka-form og straight ra if naay double bond. So ang tendency, if tapara na siya, if you have those fatty acids, then it will form, the kink will kanang form some space here, di ba? So naa siya space compared sa saturated nga maka-form siya og compressed kaayo nga structure. Di ba? So that's why this appears solid kay dugol ang iyahang dugol, compact, it's rigid, di ba? Kay dugol ang iyahang kanang fatty acid nga moieties, di ba? Whereas kini, if you have this is kanang it, because of the spaces in between, because of the formation of this, tungod sa kink ba nga gi-form tungod sa double bond, there's a kink here, di ba? Kanang fold ba, some fold here. So this allows kanang a non-rigid, so meaning it's more fluid compared sa saturated. That's why they appear liquid at room temperature. Okay? So an example of the unsaturated fatty acids are oleic o linoleic. So these are common unsaturated fatty acids. So ang oleic is monounsaturated, so you only have this double bond, whereas ang linoleic is polyunsaturated, so nakay duha ka double bond. Okay, so these are common animal fats, and the tropical oils are mostly saturated. So these are the fats and oils that are common. So, mao ni ang level sa ilang polyunsaturated fat. Saturated fat, yeah. Polyunsaturated fat, and this one is monounsaturated. Okay? So, ang fatty acids po class can be named depending on the location of their double bonds. So, that is why we have omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acid. It's due to the presence and location of the double bond. So, to name this to name this using the omega naming class, you start with the methyl end. You start counting at the carbon from the methyl end, not from the carboxyl end. Okay, so if, for example, for linolenic acid, that's carbon 1, 2, 3. So because the double bond starts here at carbon number 3, it is called an omega-3 fatty acid. Now, for linoleic, on the other hand, if we start counting from this carbon, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's called an omega-6 fatty acid because the double bond started at this carbon 6 from the methyl end. Okay, so it's from the methyl end, okay? Now, fatty acids class can be hydrogenated. So this meaning it's an addition of hydrogen to unsaturated. So, di ba, ang difference sa saturated is that if you have a saturated class, meaning it's saturated with hydrogen. This is saturated. Mao ni ang saturated. Okay? Now, if you have an unsaturated, meaning because ang usa ka carbon-carbon bond is gigamit man siya sa double bond, so you can only have 2 hydrogen. Kay upat naman ang kaya nga maband sa carbon. So, around 1 carbon, it should only accommodate 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So, it should only accommodate 4. So, that means if you have a carbon-carbon double bond, it can only accommodate 2 hydrogen. That is why it's called unsaturated because it is not saturated with hydrogen. Kay duha ra man iyang hydrogen nga nakaband. Okay? So, for fatty acids class or even in fats, okay, so we will know later kung unsa jud na ang fats. So these are fatty acids, okay? So ang fatty acids class, they undergo a process of hydrogenation, meaning it's an addition of hydrogen. So this occurs to make this, because this is more solid, diba? They appear solid at room temp and this appears liquid at room temp, diba? So, to make this more firm, so they want this to become more firm. So, they want to convert this into this one. So, they will add hydrogen to that one. So, H2 in platinum with platinum nga catalyst. Okay? So, these undergo hydrogenation, meaning the addition of hydrogen. So if you add hydrogen here, this bond will break and then mo form siya og saturated. Ang effect ani class is it makes the fatty acid more solid or more firm, di ba? Kay we are removing the double bond man, so we are removing that kink, di ba? And then ang effect ani is that it becomes more stable and it protects against oxidation because single saturated class is less reactive compared to unsaturated. Okay, so these are the least reactive nga organic compounds. The alkanes, kung single bond tanan, least reactive na sila. Okay, so that's why they are more stable. Kay dili man sila mo react, dili sila ma-oxidize dayon. So they are also more shelf stable. Okay? So that is why in the industry, they use this process. Hydrogenation process is used para ma-increase nila ang shelf life sa ilahang products. So, these are used in margarine, in shortening, peanut butter, okay? So, these are used in many products. So, this is the process of hydrogenation. So, gikan sa naay double bond, mahimo siyang single bond. Now, in this case class, this is for complete. So this is for complete hydrogenation. Okay? Now, we can also do partial hydrogenation. Okay? So ang partial hydrogenation class, instead of just this double bond, so for this double bond, we can convert a cis double bond to a trans double bond. So unsa man ang cis og trans nga double bond? So cis og trans nga fatty acid. So ang cis nga fatty acid class is meaning if you have this carbon-carbon double bond, so this is the fatty acid, meaning, di ba, namnay H, dira, di ba? Meaning, ang cis class is that same side ang H, kunya, same side po na ang katong long chain, long hydrocarbon chain. Okay, so, this will create a U nga configuration. Ang trans class is that ang H, so this is the cis, okay? Ang trans nga fatty acid class is that ang H are on the opposite side of the double bond. So, naapod sa opposite side ang kaning long chain. So, this makes a more linear compared sa cis. Okay, so, mas duol ni siya sa katong more solid, di ba? Kay this is more linear man compared to the cis because the cis creates this U form. So, when a fat class, ang fat class, it exists in cis. In ani ang nature sa fat naturally, okay? Most commonly, ang fat kay in cis configuration. If you have an unsaturated fat, it is in the cis configuration. Now, because to increase the shelf life, diba? To increase the shelf life, we want it to become more rigid, like more firm. So to make it more firm, we could either convert it to a saturated one, katong walay double bond, or the other option class is to convert that into a trans nga configuration. So mo na i-form siya og kanang trans. So to do that, we can just use partial hydrogenation. Okay? So, ang mahitabo sa partial hydrogenation class is instead of converting this double bond into a single bond, we just convert the cis form into a trans nga form. So, this is a cis fatty acid. So, naa sa same side ang long chain. This makes this, ang structure kay ingon ani ang forma, di ba? It's kanang mas makabuhat siya og space, di ba? It's more fluid compared sa trans. Kay ang trans, because it's on the opposite side of the double bond. They are on the opposite side of the double bond. Say they are more linear if you compare that with this one. So in partial hydrogenation, you just convert the cis into trans. That's what happens in partial hydrogenation. Okay, so those compounds class, if you notice, ang fatty acids are very much hydrophobic, meaning they are non-polar because of the presence of these kaning daghan kaayo nga kini hydrocarbon portion, diba? So they are non-polar, but they have a polar moiety, diba? Kining carboxyl group is a polar because this oxygen is highly electronegative, so they take the electron density somehow, okay, to them. So mo nang somehow there is a polar portion in a fatty acid. So when it interacts with water class, when a fatty acid interacts with water, ang tendency ana is that magtapok ang non-polar unya nasa gawas ang polar such that this will interact because these are polar and water is polar. So this will interact with the water, ang polar. So this is what we call as a micelle. So in fact, ang sa soap, this is the function of the soap or detergent. So magtapok dira ang non-polar, and so is the grease and oil, di ba? Kay mao man ang purpose sa soap, atong tangtangon ang oil and grease, di ba? We want to remove oil and grease. So the oil and grease will be attracted to this non-polar because oil and grease are non-polar, and so the water will be attracted to the polar ends of the soap. Okay, so this makes this allows the water to kanang murag ma-connected na siya sa oil, di ba? It's like this fatty acid, the fatty acid connects the polar to the non-polar. Diba? So, the next thing that we will discuss is the triglycerides. So, ang triglyceride class, this involves fats and oils. So, katong ganiha, we are just discussing about the fatty acids. So, these are just the fatty acids, diba? Maura na ang fatty acids. Okay, this is the fatty acids. And so, ang triglycerides class are fats and oils. And these are the predominant form of fat in foods. And also the major storage form of fat in the body. So if you remember, sa katong carbohydrates na itong lecture, when we eat carbs, diba, it will be digested into glucose man, diba? But when we have too much glucose in the bloodstream, the insulin will tell the glucose nga musulod sa liver ug sa muscle and form glycogen. But then once dili na gid masigo, dili na when the liver and the muscle are full, so they could not accommodate any glucose anymore. They could not accommodate the glucose anymore, and there's still so much glucose present in the bloodstream. Then those glucose will be converted into triglycerides. So they will be stored in the fat cells. Okay? That is why the fat cells are also a major storage in the form of triglycerides. Lipids are also a major storage form of fat in the body. That is in the form of triglycerides. Okay? So they are also our they can also be used as the energy. Okay, so ang structure sa triglyceride class is composed of 3 fatty acids and glycerol. So that is why we discussed fatty acids first, because the rest of the lipids will be composed of fatty acids. Okay? Except for some, at least. So triglycerides are a storage form of fatty acids in mammals. So often, kung magpa-test ganito sa blood, they also measure the triglyceride levels because this is a risk indicator for atherosclerosis. Okay? So, mo nang, if you notice kung magpalab mo kay naay ka ng, kung magpalab mo kay naay triglyceride level pod na sa result. Okay? So, ang triglyceride class are a combination of 3 fatty acid molecules with a glycerol molecule. So, this is the glycerol molecule and it is connected to 3 fatty acids. So, the structure of glycerol class is this. So, you have C, OH. So, mo na yung structure sa glycerol. So, it's a triol. Okay, CH2. Okay. It's a triol. Okay? So, tulo ka OH niya. So, when a fatty acid reacts with this, because it's an alcohol plus a carboxylic acid, it's like an ester bond, di ba? So, you need to dehydrate. Remember, when you construct a bond, then you need to dehydrate. So, you need to remove OH and H here. So, manang nabilin is kining O na lang ang nabilin and it's bonded to this carbon. Okay, so mao na siya. Now, ang triglyceride class is composed of this glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acids. So these are the 3 fatty acids. Now, ang fatty acids class, they may be different. It's not necessary nga same ang tulo ka fatty acids. They could be different. So this is the reason why natay fats ug natay oils, because some of these fatty acids are unsaturated while others are saturated, di ba? Others are saturated. So this could form a kink, depende sa if it's trans or cis or trans, di ba? So cis or trans only occurs for those with double bonds, okay? Kay dili man ka maka-form og cis or trans ha, single bonds lang. Okay? So because of the presence of this double bonds, so maka-form sila og kink. Mo nang natay fats, natay oils. So mao pud na nga ang chain length o ang saturation katong sa first few slide nato nga ang saturation affects the properties and the structure of a lipid or of a fatty acid, and in this case of the triglyceride. Okay? So just as with fatty acids, where the presence of cis double bonds lower the melting points. Okay? So triglycerides made from unsaturated fatty acids have lower melting points. So kung unsa ang property sa fatty acid, that will give you the property of the triglyceride. Okay? So meaning ang triglyceride from mammals, because from animals we tend to have saturated fatty acids ang animals, okay? So that is why ang nasa animals are usually fats, whereas for plants, kung nasa plants, they are mostly unsaturated fatty acids. Ang triglycerides nga nasa plants are usually unsaturated. That's why they are oils. So if you notice, these are solid and this is liquid because it's composed of unsaturated fatty acid. Okay? Now, as I've said, ang triglyceride are used as a form of stored energy. Okay? Katong excess nga glucose, di ba? So, when you eat more than you need, so kung mas daghan ra imong gikaon compared sa imong energy requirements, this will be katong imong gikaon will be stored in the form of fat. Okay? So, fat can store almost twice as much energy per gram as carbohydrates and proteins. Okay? And in mammals, the fats are stored in the adipose tissue. A function po sa adipose tissue class is that they protect organs from shock and cold. Kay, di ba, maunang moingon ta nga, kung tambok ka, dili ka dalion matugnawon. Okay? Because it's actually because of the presence of fats in your adipose tissue. So, in the body, ang fats mo provide na sila og 9 kilocalories per gram. So, they supply 60% of body's energy needs at rest. Okay? And they also function as insulation, and they also function as cell membrane constituents. For foods, ang fats, they provide 9 kilocalories per gram. They contribute to flavor, aroma, and tenderness, and provide satiety. So, nang busog ka itong pamati. And they also carry the fat-soluble vitamins. So, these are the 5 fat-soluble vitamins. This A, D, E, K. We usually use the mnemonic ADEC for fat-soluble vitamins. These provide a source of essential fatty acids. Okay? So, ang essential fatty acids class, these are 2 polyunsaturated fatty acids that must be provided in diet. So, you only have these 2 fatty acids. Essential meaning kinahanglan sila kaunon. Dili sila ma-produce inside the body. They have to be taken in from our diet. So, ang duha ka essential fatty acids are the omega-3 ug omega-6, the linoleic and linolenic fatty acids. Okay, these can be found in plant oils, in nuts, seeds, whole grains, and fish. Okay, so these are important for these purposes, normal growth and development, and they could also prevent heart disease, hypertension. Okay, so here we have the sources of omega fatty acids. So these are the common omega fatty acids. So we have linoleic, arachidonic, these are omega-6, and the omega-3, we have linolenic, EPA, and DHA. Okay. Now, for the health effects of fats, so if you intake excess fat, that most likely it will cause obesity, diabetes. You know, as we have discussed from carbs, diba? From carbohydrate nga lecture. If you take too much of the food, then it could cause diabetes. It's not just applicable for carbohydrates. It's even more applicable to this one, intake of fat. So, cancer, heart disease. Okay? Triglycerides, ang reaction nga i-undergo sa triglyceride are hydrogenation. You have observed this katong mo convert ang unsaturated into saturated, or ang unsaturated nga cis mahimong trans, and also it undergoes oxidation and base catalyzed hydrolysis or saponification. So mao ni ang gigamit, this process it is what is used in the making of soap. Okay, but we will not go there. So let's proceed to fat digestion. So when fat is digested, class, the process is hydrolysis. Okay, the process is called hydrolysis. And then, so ang fat, diba, it's in the form of triglycerides, ang fat. So in the form of triglycerides, kung i-hydrolyze na siya, so dapat ma-break down. Kay hydrolysis, meaning addition of water, that's breaking down, diba? So it will form monoglycerides, fatty acids, and glycerol. So for example, this one, so this is the triglyceride, kini, mao ni ang triglyceride. And then once i-hydrolyze na nimo, meaning ada nimo water, so ma-break na siya. So mao na break nimo. This is the water nga gi-add, H2O. Diba? So ma-break na siya into fatty acid, monoglyceride because now there's just one fatty acid, and then you have two fatty acids. Okay? So ang gigamit sa mouth, ang gigamit nato for the digestion, it starts in the mouth. So mouth, we have lipase. It's called lingual lipase because it's from the mouth. It's the enzyme that's produced from the mouth. Okay, so lipase, class, it's again basta nagani na ase, it means an enzyme. So it's the enzyme that could break down lipids. So pareho sa amylase, katong sa salivary amylase. So amylase, meaning it's the enzyme that breaks down amylose. Okay, it's like that. And then for stomach, it's just churning and mixing, and you also have gastric lipase. Then small intestine, we have pancreatic lipase, intestinal lipase, and then you also have the bile for emulsification. Okay, so ang fat, class, is emulsify na siya sa bile. So unsa man na ang emulsify? So what does it mean? So in this case, mga class, so in this case, mga good class, ang fat, diba, in the small intestine, you have watery GI juices. So watery meaning this is polar. So the fat will not mix here. Dili siya mo mix dere. But the enzymes of the small intestine are present in these watery GI juices. So na sila dere naglutaw-lutaw, diba? They're floating here. So the enzyme could not attack the fat. Dili niya ma-digest ang fat because it could not even go near the fat because the fat cannot mix in these watery GI juices. So what happens, class, is that in the stomach, this fat and these GI juices, they will tend to separate. Okay, so these enzymes cannot get at the fat. So when fat flows, it goes to the intestine. So gikan sa stomach, mo flow siya sa small intestine. Ang gallbladder, class, mo secrete na og bile. Okay, so once na ang fat small intestine, the gallbladder will secrete the bile. Okay, so when it secretes the bile has an affinity that this bile, class, it has an affinity for both fat and water. So that's why it's like it has a polar and non-polar. Diba? Pareho tong sa pareho tong formation of micelle. Okay? So ang bile has both affinity of fat and water, and so it can bring the fat and water together. So ang fat, so dara ang fat dire, i-attack na siya sa bile, mupaduol makasulod na siya sa water. So this is now the emulsified fat. Maka-flow na siya diri sa watery GI juices, di ba? So na siya sa watery GI juices. So now you have this emulsified fat. Because you have this emulsified fat flowing in the watery GI juice, na diri sa GI juice. So this enzyme can now attack the fat, and so the digestion becomes more efficient. Okay, so it's the action of the bile, wherein ang bile has an affinity for both fat and water. Okay, so this is how the digestion of fat goes. So from the mouth, you have lingual lipase, diba? So gikan pa ka sa mouth na nanay lingual lipase that helps that helps in the digestion. So once it goes to the stomach, diba? If you compare this with amylase, diba sa amylase kay sa carbohydrate nga digestion, ang amylase is ma-inactivate siya diri because the stomach is very acidic, diba? Because the stomach is acidic, it was able to inactivate the amylase. But in this case, class, ang lipase is a pH stable. It's an acid stable nga lipase. So even in the stomach, it is not inactivated. Bisan unsa pa ka-acidic ang stomach. So the presence of that lingual lipase will initiate the digestion by hydrolyzing one bond of the triglyceride to produce diglyceride. So gikan sa ana nga triglyceride, it will hydrolyze, so ma-break na siya, forming and glycerol. This one, diglyceride and one fatty acid. Okay, so this is what happens inside the stomach. Okay, so another important thing here is that ang churning of mixing, so ang pagmix, mechanical lang nga mixing sa stomach, class, this allows the water, so this allows the water and fat and acid to be mixed together. So makatabang siya para ma-in contact ang kining fatty acid the water where it contains the enzymes, diba? Ang juices diri nga nag-contain sa enzymes. They help para magka-mix, mag-abot na silang tanan. It's like imong gistir ba, diba? So ang gastric lipase maka-access pod siya, maka-hydrolyze pod siya sa fat. So meaning inside the stomach you will have the lingual lipase nga mo initiate ani kini nga process, maka-form ani, and then because of the churning and mixing of the stomach, makatabang ang the gastric lipase will help in this digestion. Okay, now once in the stomach, once it flows to the small intestine, the fat flows to the small intestine. The gallbladder, the gallbladder will secrete bile through the bile duct. So this is the bile duct kini. So ang gallbladder, class, mo secrete na siya og bile padung sa small intestine. So as we have seen earlier, nga ang bile maka-emulsify siya sa fat. So ma-mix niya ang fat ug ang ma-mix niya ang fat into the kanang GI juices, di ba? Which contains the enzyme. So mo-flow na din na ang pancreatic lipase. So gikan sa pancreas, mo-flow din ang pancreatic lipase. So you have pancreatic lipase nya kining sa small intestine, there are also intestinal lipase. So these two lipases will act on the emulsified fat nga na-form sa katong gi-emulsify sa bile. So that will form monoglycerides, glycerol, fatty acids, and they will be absorbed by the body. Okay? So ang uban nga fats, they will be excreted here. Okay?